To call Ferrari's performance in Montreal underwhelming would be an understatement. The Scuderia endured a torrid weekend, with the writing on the wall from Saturday onwards. After struggling in the final practice session, the team suffered a double Q2 elimination. Ferrari ran out of new soft compound tires for Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. This forced them to attempt to progress into Q3 on used tires, which ultimately failed. Saturday proved difficult, but the race became an unmitigated disaster. Charles Leclerc started at an immediate disadvantage, nursing a power unit problem that stopped him from progressing. He pitted for a lengthy stop to perform software resets, gambling on dry compound tires on a wet track that was not yet ready for slicks. Forced to pit again for intermediates, he retired a few laps later. Carlos Sainz, meanwhile, battled with a lack of grip on the fringes of the points. A clumsy spin sent him into the side of Alex Albon's Williams, the damage ending both their races. The true Ferrari F1 team of the 2024 season is clearly not the one seen at the 4.361-kilometer Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve in Montreal. Under the Canadian rain, we saw the worst SF-24 car of the current championship. A terrible weekend for the Maranello team, so disappointing that it seemed like just a bad copy of the SF-24 that in previous races was competing to the 10th of a second with Red Bull and Mercedes. On Saturday, the critic, Fernando Alonso, commented after the qualifying session with his usual smugness to the media by saying, "We are dealing with smart people, right? We are ahead of Sergio Perez and the two Ferrari cars who had already won the championship in Monte Carlo." Some resentment feelings that the Spanish driver cannot forget, mainly because he has experienced firsthand the lack of consistency that the Maranello team has been struggling with in the last 15 years. 2 retirements, 0 points for Ferrari at the Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve in Montreal. The Canadian outcome is dismal, but Italian side must react immediately to this setback that interrupted the enthusiasm sparked after Charles Leclerc's amazing success on the streets of Monaco and Monte Carlo, which was completed by Carlos Sainz's 3rd place, making it a double podium finish that led to a lot of discussions regarding Ferrari's prospects of challenging for the 2024 Formula One Constructors Championship. It's a team that arrived on Notre Dame Island with so-called flat tires, lacking the awareness that they could fight on equal terms with the most accredited rivals. And the facts showed that in the single lap, the red car ended up behind even Mercedes, Racing Bulls, and Aston Martin. The SF-24 was off the charts, indicating that something significant went wrong in the setup approval for Montreal's layout. The feeling, which is almost a certainty, is that Ferrari, having to raise the car's floor from the track surface, lost much more downforce than the competition, ending up with a car that did not transfer enough energy to the tires in order to bring them into the ideal temperature window. It is true that the difference was made by a few thousandths of a second in Q2, but the Maranello team did not know how to react to the difficulties with the approach of those aware of their potential, allowing themselves to be taken by that climate of inadequacy that accompanied the North American weekend. The drivers themselves seem to lack energy and enthusiasm compared to the fighters we know, so it is fair to believe that something was wrong in the Ferrari garage last weekend, contributing to weaken the entire team. If we add to all this the electronic problems with Charles Leclerc's power unit, it is easy to complete a decidedly negative analysis of a trip to forget. Charles Leclerc's engine did not suffer damage despite experiencing misfiring, irregular ignitions, that deprived the Monegasque driver of significant power for about 15 laps. Team principal Fred Vasseur spoke of a loss of about 80 horsepower during this time, which was particularly visible as the track dried out. Ferrari will precautionarily replace the power unit control unit, and in the Spanish Grand Prix weekend, everything should return to normal. Barcelona will be a crucial event. The Circuit de Catalunya is a sort of open-air wind tunnel that combines all the characteristics to see if a car is indeed competitive. A track that historically has not been favorable to the red car, as it combines a long straight and fast long corners with a very technical third sector that seems designed to highlight the flaws of the red car. In the debriefing at Maranello after the disappointing outcome of the Canadian Grand Prix, Frédéric Vasseur did not conduct any trials, hoping that the racing department would immediately find the thread, confident that the Maranello team's potential is clearly a different one. The first simulations for the Spanish racetrack seem encouraging. The goal is to extract all the potential from the SF-24 with careful setup work, So far, the upgrade package that debuted at the Imola circuit has given positive indications, but it has not yet shown the numbers that the technicians led by Enrico Cardile, Ferrari's technical director of chassis and aerodynamics, had seen in the wind tunnel. There is also an attempt to anticipate some new features in Spain, which we discussed in a previous video, but the French team principal prefers to proceed cautiously, putting only adequately verified parts in the car. The Canadian blow was strong for Scuderia Ferrari, but the broad-shouldered French manager did not waver, and he demands that the rest of the sporting management follow him, relying on the technical and human values that the prancing horse can bring to the field. Fred Vasseur reflected further on Ferrari's woes in Montreal, stating that the team would not change its approach following one bad race. He acknowledged that sometimes it can feel like everything is going wrong and everything is against you, but emphasized that they would not alter their strategy. The Frenchman reiterated that the team works together with the drivers in both good and bad moments and would maintain the same approach for the next weekend. He expressed that he was not intimidated by such challenging weekends, acknowledging that it's simply part of racing. Charles Leclerc became frustrated in the opening stages of the Canadian Grand Prix as he attempted to race with his power unit issues, with his Ferrari race engineer Brian Bazzi continually providing him with instruction on commands and settings in order to deal with the problem and attempt to fix it without having to pit, which was eventually not possible. Frédéric Vasseur said he understood the Monegasque driver's frustrations. He explained that when Charles Leclerc was fighting in a group and realized he was missing 10 or 15 kilometers per hour with no chance to overtake cars that were in theory slower than the SF-24, and his engineers were informing him that they were losing around 80 horsepower, it was perfectly understandable that motivation would be difficult to find in such a situation, especially considering the high expectations Ferrari had for the Montreal Grand Prix prior to the race weekend. Frédéric Vasseur acknowledged the frustration and added that if Charles Leclerc was not frustrated under these conditions, he would in fact be worried. As Formula One prepares to return to Europe for the first triple header of the season, Frédéric Vasseur stated that Ferrari was targeting a comeback in Spain and pointed to Red Bull's struggles in the Monaco Grand Prix as a reason to maintain the team's approach for 2024. Fred Vasseur noted that just as Red Bull had a tough weekend the previous week, it was now Ferrari's turn to face difficulties. He emphasized the importance of remembering that there were still 15 or 16 races remaining in the season, in fact likening it to the length of the 2018 or 2017 seasons. The French manager stressed that the championship was still ahead of them, acknowledging that there would be both tough and good weekends. The key, he asserted, was to keep the same approach, continue developing, and fix the issues. He remarked that a good weekend did not make them world champions, nor did a tough weekend mean they were nowhere. Fred Vasseur concluded by expressing confidence that Ferrari would be back on pace in Spain.